at Greenville University is to help people think deeply about the reality of the Christian faith. Sometimes we don't do that well, and I think one of the ministries that is doing that well across the United States and the world is the Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, or known for short RZIM. And I'm thrilled to have our first representative from RZIM with us today, Cameron McAllister. We picked Cameron up from the airport yesterday afternoon, and we've had the time with him since then. And what we've found is he is thoughtful, he reads prolifically, he processes what he reads, and he's just very focused and very intentional in trying to answer the deep questions about the Christian faith. Why is it unique? Why is it credible, intellectually, emotionally, relationally, to be followers of Jesus Christ in a world in which there seems to be so many different options? We've watched him now present twice. I have not yet heard him say once. Maybe tonight he'll be counting. Listen closely just in case he does. And we're just thrilled to have people of this intellectual caliber in our midst. So he'll be presenting his topic, and then there'll be an opportunity for us to have some question and answer at the end. His undergraduate degree is from Toccoa Falls College, and his master's in cultural apologetics is from Houston Baptist University. Cameron is married to Heather, and they're just about to enter the terrible twos with a 2-year-old son called Dylan. So I just welcome you. Thank you so much that you're here.
All right. Nice to see all of you tonight. Thank you for being here. I realize that there are many other competing activities, and I know that there's some homework that some of you should be doing. Maybe you are doing it right now, so I won't take any offense if the heads go down, the phones come out, the computers come out. But it's been great to be on your campus. I've enjoyed the conversations immensely. So tonight, what I want to do is amplify some of what I talked about in chapel this morning. And no worries if you weren't there. This is meant to be a self-standing talk. But I find, as a Christian, that one of the major challenges I face now as I travel around the United States and as I travel around the world is not so much antagonism. It is apathy. It's easier for me, for instance, to deal with somebody who says, I think you are absolutely wrong, I think religion is poisonous, I think it's pernicious and dangerous for society. It's much easier for me to deal with that than it is for me to deal with, yeah, I don't really care. If that works for you, that's great. Doesn't work for me, that's my prerogative. But the kind of casual dismissal is actually much more difficult to deal with. Because in that first case, with the person who's antagonistic, there's real commitment there. The person actually is invested in the topic. But what do you do when you talk to somebody who really doesn't care? And so I find that a huge part of what I do now as a Christian and as an apologist, I'll talk a little bit about what I do as an apologist, what that means, what it is. Doesn't mean I go around apologizing a lot. But a lot of what I do now involves restoring a sense of the significance of Christianity, helping people to see why it matters in the first place. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are convinced that it's true, but it's a step in the right direction. If we can go from I just don't care or whatever to, all right, I can see the point. I can see why this is important. I think we've made a really crucial step. Let me say a few words about apologetics. So we're a small group here. By a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the word apologetics? Have you ever heard it? Most people are somewhat familiar. Apologetics is really just the defense of the Christian faith. It comes from the Greek word apologia, which meant to give a defense. And the connotations behind that word are actually formal. They would involve a courtroom. So if accusations came against a person, they would give an apologia in a courtroom. Well, the commandment comes from 1 Peter 3:15. And that verse is burned into the mind of every frontline apologist. You're supposed to be able to recite it in your sleep if you're a frontline apologist. But essentially, what Peter is saying is, in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord, always being prepared to give a defense to anyone who asks you to give an answer for the hope that is within you. Do this with gentleness and respect. And the context here is Peter is writing to Christians in the Roman Empire. This is the birth of the church, and they're facing huge opposition from the culture around them, automatically. And that opposition is prompting questions. So what's the opposition, you ask? Well, this little sect of people who are first called Christians in Acts chapter 11, I think, by the way, the book of Acts in the New Testament is one of the most exciting books in Scripture. It's the birth of the church, and immediately you see the Christians are in conflict with the powers surrounding them. And the apostles often find themselves hauled in front of tribunals, and they have to give defenses. Well, Christians, this little sect, they are confessing Jesus as Lord. Not a Lord, but as the Lord. And not Lord of just them, Lord of all. In the Roman Empire, that's a problem. There's a misconception that circulates in academia these days as well, and a lot of really smart, well-informed people who frankly should know better espouse this view, but they'll say something along the lines of, well, the Roman Empire was once this beautiful place filled with a diversity of views and all these different gods, and it was this wonderful party. And then Christians came along with their narrow, monotheistic religion, and they just ruined it for everybody. Well, that really wasn't the case. Yes, there were countless gods. Yes, there was a lot of different kinds of worship. There was a huge spectacle. But your primary allegiance had to be to Rome. And if it wasn't to Rome, you were suspected of treason and sedition. So apologetics didn't arise in a vacuum. It wasn't some academic field. It was Christians responding to many of the often outlandish accusations that were being hurled at them from the surrounding culture. And they were outlandish. Christians were accused of, among other things, being cannibals. Scholars speculate that this comes from the Lord's Supper. Jesus did, after all, say, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. To say that to a Jewish audience, folks, very, very powerful stuff. Very offensive stuff. There was also accusations of orgies. There were accusations of Christians being seditious and treasonous. And so one of the first books with apology in the title, the Apologia by Justin Martyr, was responding to these accusations. So back to Peter. Peter is assuming that if you're a Christian, it's going to put you at odds with the world around you, and people are going to ask you questions. So everybody, this is a calling on everybody's life, not just the person behind the microphone. Yes, there are people on the front lines, but all of us who call ourselves followers of Christ are called to give an account when people ask us. Now look at our world today. Are we really so different from ancient Rome? If you're a Christian, you can't fail to notice that often that will put you at odds with surrounding assumptions. If you're a Christian, you often find yourself singled out and you find accusations being hurled your way. It's no surprise. And it's interesting, the apostles in the book of Acts, whenever this happens, and they are persecuted, riots are started, they're flogged, there's a really haunting expression afterwards. It says they thanked the Lord for the honor of suffering for the gospel. Do we do that? This is why it's tough. My colleague and friend Oz Guinness, who's a sociologist, he often points out Christians talking about their rights. In a certain sense it makes sense, but in another sense it's misguided. Yes, we're going to be at odds with the world around us. There's nothing new there. But right now, I find myself, so I live in Georgia. I'm in the Bible Belt South. And the offensive elements of Christianity are often cleaned out. And Christianity is understood as just another lifestyle. Christianity is a convenient sort of view to espouse. You go to church, it's kind of a social club. But it doesn't need to get in the way of any of your other affairs. You go to church, but then you leave church and you go to the real world. So that's the notion I want to take down. We live so much in the moment. One of the reasons why I think the significance of Christianity is often lost is because we are just in a world filled with distractions, left, right, and center. You've got one of them that you just carry around in your pocket wherever you go. It's a beautiful little digital rabbit hole that you can fall through whenever you want, whenever it's convenient. Here's an interesting experience that most of us know about. You ever found an article, gets your attention, maybe it's got a clickbait title or something like that, you click it. You start reading the article, and then you start noticing that there are all these hyperlinked sections in that article. As I wrote about here, here, you click the here, and now you're in a different article, and then in that different article is another hyperlink, and pretty soon you've fallen through so many digital trapdoors, you don't even remember what you were looking at in the first place, and you're lost. We're so distracted, and we're so focused on the moment. So this app is old news, but I think it's still really interesting. There was a profile on it in the New Yorker several years ago. Do any of you know what Days of Life app is? You ever heard of that? Okay. So I think it's still on the market. Days of Life app. You plug in your age, your gender, and your weight, and I think maybe a couple of other variables. And based on these questions, Days of Life app estimates how long you have left to live. And it issues a countdown for you. And there's a diminishing pie chart, and there's a sort of a timer countdown, and if you're really morbid, you can actually have this thing upload the data to your social media account so everybody else can watch the countdown. Maybe some people are excited and some people are sad. Who knows? Days of Life app. This is filed in the productivity folder of the App Store. And the thinking, of course, is, hey, carpe diem, seize the day. Time is running out. You want to talk to that girl? You want to talk to that guy? Do it now. You want to get that promotion? Take hold of all of the opportunities now because time is running out. Look at that pie chart. It's going down. You're not getting any younger. We're so harnessed to the moment. Such immediacy all the time. And we're surrounded by options everywhere. Here's another form of modern despair. See if I'm describing you. You ever been on a streaming service? Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever it is. And you just keep looking and looking, and you're so afraid to commit to a title, because if you commit to one title, you're afraid that you're going to miss something out there, and there's always something better on another title. So pretty soon, you've done more looking, and you've never actually settled on anything in the first place. We used to do this with channel surfing, but now we do this with streaming services. So much is claiming our attention. So much is competing for our attention all the time. And I've often said this, it is possible to sleepwalk through your life, if you like. It's possible to not pay attention to any of the major issues in life either. Years ago on the show, Friends, which was before most of your time, but part of my time, I suppose. But there's an episode that captures this really well, I think. And it was an unwitting moment of reality. So one of the characters, Joey, Triviani, if you're keeping score, one of the characters, he's at a funeral. And at the funeral, he has smuggled in a portable television. Of course, now he wouldn't need to do that. All he would need is his phone. And he's watching a football game during the eulogy. The bereaved discovers what he's doing, but he's not incensed. And pretty soon, Joey and the bereaved are cheering so loudly they are disrupting the eulogy. It's funny and it's sad. Because death is something that we're all going to have to deal with. Many of us are dealing with it. Many of you have dealt with it. And yet, that shows you, even life and death matters. We can snooze through those. So little wonder that we now trivialize life and death and life after death questions. So this is the environment in which we find ourselves. This is the whatever environment that I'm talking about. So, what I want to do this evening is I want to walk you through 4 questions. And these 4 questions really correspond to a Christian understanding of reality. The first question is, why is there something rather than nothing? That's the question of origins or creation. So why is there something rather than nothing? The second question, and I'm really going to dwell at length on the second one because we have a hard time with it nowadays. The second question is, what's wrong with us? That's fall. That's the fall. The third question is, who will save us? And finally, the final question is, what happens after we die? So this pattern that I've just described is creation, fall, redemption, restoration. That's really the Christian cosmology. And in our United States, it's largely forgotten. And definitely the significance of it is forgotten. Because if we have any understanding as a culture of the Bible nowadays, it's usually very piecemeal. It's a snippet. It's a Bible verse here and there, and we tend to see it as a collection of inspirational verses. How many of us know that verse from Philippians, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I got that tattooed on my arm after my marathon. Just kidding. And sorry if you did. That's not really what that verse is getting at, by the way. Paul is talking about being able to thrive in extreme austerity and poverty and with total wealth and extravagance. Neither one of them crushes him. That's what he's talking about there. But again, we have this really fragmentary understanding of the Bible, and we don't see it as a unified story and picture and vision of the Lord of all creation, making human beings in his image, designing them for relationship with him, them falling, betraying him, rebelling against him, and then him intervening to save them. And finally, giving us the promise of his return to make all things new, to wipe away every tear. So I want to make sense of that a little bit today. We hear resurrection, we hear incarnation, even that's a theological dusty word. And again, I think it's old hat for us. Some of this sounds old, some of it has a little bit of the veneer of been there, done that about the t-shirt. I want to try to wipe some of the dust off of this to get us thinking. And then we'll do a Q&A if you're still awake and sentient. I've just had a lot of coffee, so I'm ready to go. Creation. Christianity maintains that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now that is a monumental statement. So I'm going to use a theological phrase here that is so stark, we need to talk about it because it's very distinct. Christians believe in creation ex nihilo. So, what does that mean? That means God created everything from nothing. He spoke creation into existence. There are a number of very important takeaways here. First of all, you and I are not necessary. You'll often hear Christians give lip service to the notion, well, it's not about us. But it truly is not about you. You're not necessary. You did not need to exist. You get to exist. That means your existence in creation is a gift. It's an act of grace. This is why often when you hear people praying, a very modern prayer is, Lord, thank you for this day. Built into that is the recognition that this day needn't have been mine. You gave it to me. You gave me existence. That's why there's breath in my lungs. Now, why does the significance of this fail to register with us? I think part of it has to do with the amazing types of creativity we see on display among humans. We've done a lot as far as our technology goes. We've harnessed the powers of science and technology to usher in new medical breakthroughs. And we've improved the quality of life drastically. And because we have so many conveniences, we are often bewitched into thinking that we are somehow self-sufficient. But you know, our old friend J.R.R. Tolkien can correct us here. You see, J.R.R. Tolkien is best known for writing The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, creator of Middle-earth. Part of what makes The Lord of the Rings such a monumental achievement, and I'm not a person who really likes fantasy very much, but I have to recognize that The Lord of the Rings is one of the great literary achievements because it is a totally believable and real world with its own customs, with its own languages. It's just amazing. But Tolkien, so one of the most creative minds in the 20th century, made a very crucial distinction between human creativity and the Lord's creativity. I promise you this has a bearing here, so just hang in there. But he pointed out in a famous essay of his called On Fairy Stories that human beings are not creators. God alone creates. We are sub-creators. That means we harness the materials around us. The writers use language. The painter uses all of the different materials, the paint, the brushes. The sculptor does the same. We're using materials here. We don't create in the pure sense. Now, some great minds have said that we do. Now, I'm a cultural apologist, which means, yes, I pay attention to philosophy, but I also love John Milton and Dante and Virginia Woolf and all those writers that your English professors inflict on you. And I actually think that the arts play a huge role in shaping the way that we think. And here, it was really the Romantics who reshaped the way we think about creativity, specifically William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Both of them argued that no, we human beings, we don't just make things in the sub-sense, we create. We actually make new things and bring them into being, and they meant this as a godlike capacity. Now, these two thinkers were geniuses and they were really gifted, but this is just old-fashioned idolatry. And it doesn't work. Because after all, none of us brought ourselves into existence. We're not self-sufficient. We are mortal. There's an expiration date on all of our efforts. So if we just restrict our gaze to the human world, we see how finite, how temporal we are. Now, there are aspirations in the sciences these days. So now, in many ways, the people who are carrying on the Romantic vision are certain scientific-minded people. That sounds odd, but I think it's really true. I'm going to talk about something that will sound a little strange and fringe right now, but it's gaining more popularity, and then we'll move on, because I have to go faster. The older I get, the more long-winded I become. It really happens. Now I'm a dad, I can say that. So, transhumanism, this is a movement that now believes, as one of their key exponents has said, that death is a technical problem. And one day we'll solve it. Whether that's through uploading our consciousness onto machines or integrating ourselves with machines. Now, when I hear this, I think of Skynet, Terminator, and RoboCop. But this does sound very sci-fi, but this line of thinking is really growing. It's one huge place where it's really being recognized is in Silicon Valley. No surprises there. The other is Oxford University. So these are top-tier thinkers, people like Steven Pinker and Nick Bostrom and many others. But really what it is, it's the attempt to become gods. We want to deify human beings. We want to be our own gods. We are going to create in the purest sense. Well, I don't think it works. And as we go forward, I'll tell you why. But this is why, I'm giving you some of the alternatives to each of these. This is why we're having a little bit of difficulty seeing the significance of being created from nothing. And the fact that God is the supreme creator if Christianity is true, and we are merely sub-creators. So now let's talk about fall. Christians, if Christianity is true, there's something fundamentally wrong with human beings, all of us. We have a hard time with this one these days. As an apologist, I find that one of the most difficult topics to broach is the bad news. Now, you notice the good news, whatever, any kind of good news, doesn't make sense without the bad news first. If I come up to you, this is an example from a philosopher named Peter Kraft, I think it's pretty good. If somebody comes up to you and says, "Congratulations, you've just won quadruple bypass surgery." Well, it doesn't mean much unless you need quadruple bypass surgery. You know, a similar kind of dynamic emerges when somebody comes up to you. Jesus loves you, and he wants to save you, and he has a wonderful plan for your life. You know, there was a time, actually, when you could say that to people, and it would mean something. It doesn't today, because people don't understand the bad news. And it sounds mildly insulting. Oh, you're assuming I need to be saved? You're assuming I need to change my life? The pastor, Timothy Keller, says it really well. The first half of the gospel is, you're evil, and you have to be saved. According to Christianity, something is wrong with us because we rebelled against our Maker. We have fallen. And because of that, there's a fundamental flaw in the human heart, and it affects everybody. I think as you look at the world around you, you have to take away the basic conclusion that something's wrong with us. But I don't think you even have to watch the 6 o'clock news. I don't think you even have to look that far. In fact, I don't think you have to look that far at all. I think you have to consult your own heart and just do an honest inventory. And think about what you've done to other people. Think about the damage you've inflicted. Yes, you've been damaged, but you in turn have damaged other people. And interestingly enough, secular thinkers recognize this fact too. A gentleman named Andrew Delbanco teaches at Columbia University. He's an English professor. A number of years ago, he wrote a book called The Death of Satan. And there's a lovely, uplifting title for you. The Death of Satan is now out of print, but it is a book of astonishing moral force. What he's doing in that book, and by the way, again, he's not a Christian. Andrew Delbanco identifies himself as a secular Jew, but he says, he traces the career of Satan throughout the years in the United States history. He talks about how first, when you've got the original settlers, Satan is a very real deceiver, and he works to deceive us and lead us into sin, and then eventually he becomes sort of a joke-like figure with red, pointy tail, more of a satire, and he's taken less and less seriously. But he also argues that we go from an age where people recognized the deficiency of the human heart, our propensity to make huge mistakes and to hurt other people. We go from that to what he calls the age of blame. And the age of blame is the age in which evil is other people. We're there now. Another book that came out recently, and I mentioned this one this morning, is a book called The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Mark Lukianoff. And they argue that one really harmful idea that's been deeply internalized by most people in the nation right now is that life is a battle between good people and evil people. And they say this is a really bad idea. Why? Because it takes you off the hook, for one. I'm not guilty. They're guilty over there. And if I've made any mistakes in my life, well, it's really because of these guys who have influenced me badly. If we just eradicate all these bad people, life would be better. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. And notice also that the ends now justify the means. You could do anything against an evil person. You're fighting an evil person. And look at our divisive tactics now. Look at what's erupting on many of our university campuses where people are being attacked. Now, many of the issues under discussion are extremely important and of the utmost gravity. And let's be honest, there are evil people. But here's my point. All of us struggle with evil. Every one of us. One of the most powerful indictments there came from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was a Russian man who was imprisoned because a letter of his that was critical of Stalin was intercepted by the secret police, and he was imprisoned in a Russian gulag. He eventually escaped. He survived stomach cancer. Amazing story. But he pointed out, and this is a piece of wisdom that I think could only come from the Lord. He pointed out when he was there, if only it were so simple that there were good people and evil people. If only we could just screen off all of the evil people, fight them, destroy the contamination, and now we'll all live happily ever after. But he says it's not like that. He says evil cuts through every human heart, and who is willing to destroy a part of his own heart? It would have been so easy for him to say life is a battle between good people and evil people. After all, here he is the prisoner in what was once called the evil empire by President Reagan at the time. He's the prisoner. There's the guard. The guy in the uniform is evil. He should be innocent, but he says, no, if the roles were reversed, I could easily be the oppressor and he could be the prisoner. You see, I really do believe that's a piece of divine wisdom. It's one thing to recognize evil when it's self-preservation is involved. Yes, this person is a disadvantage to me, they're hurting me. It's another thing to say, if the roles were reversed, I would probably do the same thing. It's powerful, powerful moral insight. But if Christianity is true, it makes sense of what's wrong with us. We're fallen, we have rebelled against our Creator, and we need to surrender to Him. Because we have to be saved. And it's here, I think, where Christians are often accused of wishful thinking, by the way. I deal with this a lot, especially when I'm on university campuses. When I was at the University of California, Berkeley, this came up a lot. Well, religion is a crutch for you. You hide from the harsh realities of life. But the irony here is, when it comes to the question of human nature, Christians look like hardened realists. Do you know, this is why I think transhumanism is a fantasy. One of the most powerful myths today is what one thinker I like, named John Gray, calls the myth of progress. The notion that we're gradually getting better and better, and one day we're going to fix ourselves. So John Gray, who is not a Christian at all, it's funny, some of the most incisive critiques on atheism come from atheists. But he points out, he says, look, we often argue, the transhumanists, who are basically just utopians, they will argue, well, as technology improves, one day we'll conquer death, it's just a technical problem, we'll get rid of warfare, we'll get rid of racism and poverty and economic disparity, and maybe we'll even be able to fix the environment. He argues they're mixing up technological progress with moral progress. And he says, look, yes, it's true, we have penicillin, but we also have the threat of nuclear proliferation. We have the destructive capacity to destroy the planet many times over. Is that progress? Will there ever be a day where we don't lock our doors at night? Will there ever be a time when we don't need a military here or a police force? He says, no, it's a fantasy. We are deluding ourselves. Human nature does not improve. We've never been able to fix ourselves, ever. I think he's right. A number of years ago, a book came out by a philosopher named Jacob Needleman, teaches at the University of San Francisco, and it's just called, Why Can't We Be Good? It's a big 500-page tome, very sophisticated argument, but here's his basic thesis. We all know what we need to do. We should treat others the way we want to be treated. We all know that. We can't do it. We've never been able to do it. We can't do it in our personal lives. We can't do it with our friends. We can't do it with the people we love most. We definitely can't do it with our enemies. So you see, if you're feeling that we're at a point of crisis here, a point of pessimism and despair, we are. Because I want you to see, we need to be saved. The bad news is real. It is bad news. And see, sometimes I have to answer questions about evil and suffering. And I have to say, well, how can we have evil and suffering in a good God? But the problem of evil, it's not some out there problem. It's our problem. We are evil. That's the problem. All of us. And we have to be saved. So that brings us to redemption. Who will save us? Who will save us? Well, the story of Christianity is also the story of the Lord who created us from nothing, formed us from the dust of the earth, and made us to be in relationship with Him. We rebelled against Him. We fell. We're exiled from Eden. And now there's death and destruction in the world. So He sends His Son into the world on a rescue operation to die for us. And it's interesting, C.S. Lewis, in one of his essays, says, Jesus didn't die for us because we were special or worthy of that sacrifice. No, exactly the opposite. He died for us because we were not worth dying for, so that we would be worthwhile to Him. See, this is the wonder of Christianity. This is where the bad news, you have to hear it, you have to hear the full weight of the badness of it to really appreciate the total and amazing, extravagant joy of it. In Romans, we are told that while Paul sets it up really practically, the Apostle Paul, he says, who would you die for? Some people, maybe, for a really good person or somebody that you really love, somebody you recognize as really good, as really righteous, you might die for that person. You might. But who would die for an evil person? Who would die for somebody who's wretched? And the story of Christianity is that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So that verse, again, it's so over familiar. Let's blow the dust off of it for a second. While we were yet sinners. Do you know what that means? That means Jesus Christ, who, if he is real, by the way, knows you inside and out, knows every thought that has ever gone through your mind, knows you at your absolute most vicious and your worst, knows all of that about you, and he died for you anyway, in your full wretchedness. But you see, this is why we need that mercy. We need to be saved. In our cultural context, is that an insult to our self-sufficiency? Yes. Is that an insult to our sense of self-identity? Yes. Christianity tells you very, very clearly that you are not your own. You were bought with a price. And if you want to receive Christ's mercy, you have to accept Christ's mercy. You've got to accept the gift he offers you. And the story of Christ is that Jesus takes on flesh. Theologians call this the incarnation. And the incarnation means that Jesus takes on flesh. He's very God and very man. That means he's fully God, fully man. And he comes to earth to show us how to live, and he goes to the cross to die for us. And he has to die for us if we're going to be saved. Because we have rebelled against him. And we cannot be in communion with a holy God if we are wretched and evil and broken. It can't happen. We would be destroyed. We can't do it. So we have to be covered by the blood of the spotless Lamb. This is where all that scriptural imagery comes in and begins to make more sense. But it's not going to make much sense unless you recognize your need for a Savior. Unless you recognize that you need to be saved. We have to come to that place. And in our world now, it's easy to avoid coming to that place. Again, all the factors I've mentioned, the distractions, the conveniences that mislead us into thinking that we've somehow solved all of our problems and that we've got it all together. But in our heart of hearts, I think unless we really kill something inside of ourselves, most of us know that this is the truth. Most of us recognize that we cannot save ourselves. And most of us recognize that we have this terrible habit of destroying relationships, hurting those around us, and really acting in ways that totally compromise us. And this is again why I think the Bible, actually, far from being a collection of pithy sayings, describes reality, as I know it. In Romans chapter 7, Paul offers one of the most incisive pictures of what it feels like to be a person when he says, the very thing I don't do the thing I want to do, and the very thing I hate is what I do. Wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of death? Have you ever thought in those terms? Sometimes the way we put it is, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Have you ever surprised yourself with your capacity to mess everything up? Has stuff ever come out of your mouth of such viciousness? Maybe when you're on the road, somebody cuts you off, and you show them a finger that's not your thumb. There's this deep reservoir of rage, this penchant, and sometimes you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway. What's wrong with us? We need to be saved. We can't do it on our own. And Jesus goes to the cross for us. Tim Keller says this really well also. He argues that on the one hand, we need to recognize that our sin is so serious that it required nothing less than the blood of the spotless Lamb. It required nothing less than Jesus Christ, the Lord of all creation, your Maker, to die for you. But on the other hand, you are so loved that God didn't spare his own Son to save you. So on the one hand, you should be humbled into the dust, and on the other hand, you should be lifted into the stars. Because that's how deeply loved you are. We need to be saved. Jesus is the one who can save you. As a Christian, may I suggest to you, if you don't recognize that truth, it's worth wrestling with. It's of the utmost significance and importance. The older you get, the more you'll find it to be the case. The more you will find the distractions. Don't crowd out all of the pain and suffering that's crouching at the door. And it's coming. It will come. Of course it will come. Christianity, by the way, is not a ticket to an easy life. It doesn't mean suddenly, Sabbath, grace, now everything's easy. Absolutely not. The promise of Christianity is not limited to this world. In fact, we Christians are awaiting Jesus' return. See, there's a lot of focus on the incarnation of Christ, but there's also the equally important, the ascension of Christ. This happens in Acts chapter 1. Jesus ascends bodily. I'll talk about why that's so important. He ascends into the heavens. And the apostles are staring into the sky and mooning and just, wow. And then we're told that an angel appears and says, why are you standing there looking into the sky? This same one who went up, who ascended like that in bodily form, will return in the same fashion. So that brings me to my final point. Restoration. What happens after we die? So, let me put it abstractly first. Christian hope is eschatological. There. Doesn't that solve everything for you? Well, that means that our hope is not in this world alone. Thank God it's not. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if we have hoped in Christ in this life alone, we are all men most to be pitied. Make no mistake about it. Christianity, the Lynch point of Christianity, is Jesus' bodily, physical resurrection from the dead. Because if he's raised from the dead, that vindicates his divinity. He has saved us. He has ascended in bodily fashion. That means Jesus remains human, by the way. Just take a minute to absorb the magnitude of that. Jesus remains human. He's the first member of what's called the new creation. And he is returning. You see, look at the world around you. When I look at it, I don't think it just needs to be improved. I don't think it needs a manicure. Now, I don't think we should withdraw from social action. I think we need to be involved in fighting human trafficking. I think we need to be involved in fighting racism, poverty. I think we need to be involved in stewarding the environment. I think all of these are totally noble causes. But in the end, this world needs to be broken and remade. We need a new world. And that's what's promised by Christianity. When Christ returns, he is ushering in a new heavens and a new earth. And he's going to wipe away every tear. And he's going to make all things new. And it will be a world without cancer clinics, without poverty, without death, without pain. That is the world that we all long for. That's the place you're made for. Christ our Maker is coming back. The question is, do you recognize your need to be saved? Or are you going to continue leaning on your own self-sufficiency? Are you going to continue looking to human efforts to try to preserve life and the world? I think that's a misguided notion. Let me end on this note, and then the monologue will end, and you guys can talk back. Always a fun and scary prospect, but you haven't thrown anything yet, so I think that's a good sign. C.S. Lewis said in one of his more challenging books, not intellectually challenging, emotionally challenging books, A Grief Observed. So Lewis wrote that book, by the way, after he lost his wife, Joy Davidman. She died of cancer. It's a very raw book. It's very honest. In fact, it's so raw that when it first was released, C.S. Lewis omitted his name from it and released it pseudonymously. He had another name on there. People figured out it was him. In fact, when he was grieving, people were giving him that book. This will really help you. Not realizing he had written it himself. Well, he says in there, he calls God the great iconoclast. You know what an iconoclast is? An iconoclast is a person who smashes idols. And I'm thinking more and more as I get older that one of the chief offenses, in the best possible sense of that word, of Jesus Christ is that he smashes every one of our idols relentlessly. So to the idea that we are creators in the divine sense, Jesus says, no, I am your maker. You are but dust. Apart from me, you truly are nothing. To the notion that there's nothing wrong with us, that if we just do away with ignorance and we get a little bit more education spread around, then eventually we'll eradicate all social ills, to that notion, Jesus says, no, you are fallen, and you're evil, and you can't save yourself. To the idea that we could save ourselves somehow, whether it's through technology or uploading our consciousness or some other sci-fi movie, Jesus says, no, apart from my blood, you cannot be saved. You must eat my flesh and drink my blood. You must be covered in the blood of the spotless Lamb. So the imagery of Christianity is visceral and violent and powerful. You need me to be saved. Apart from the cross, you can't be saved. And by the way, he also says, well, what about if there are other means? There are no other means. I am the way, the truth, and the life, says Jesus. Not a way, a truth, and a life. The way, the truth, and the life. There's no other. I'm it. To the notion that somehow we will restore everything, that we can somehow improve this world, Jesus says, no, this world will be destroyed. So don't get too attached. And this body that you have right now, you're going to lose it. But don't worry, you'll get a new body, a resurrected body. But all of our notions of self-deification, self-sufficiency, they're all destroyed comprehensively by Christ. Not just by his words, but by his life and his mission. By his very life, it's all destroyed. Christ is the great iconoclast. If he's your Lord, if you follow him, you will find yourself at odds with the world around you. And you should expect that. No surprises there. Be prepared to give answers. But your ultimate hope is in the resurrection and the life. And your hope will not disappoint you. This world alone was never meant to satisfy you. It can't. But there's another world. And that's the world where you belong.